The fruit and vegetables are plentiful. Mountains stretch over to the west, and to the east, the Caspian Sea. It's a rich landscape, not just in fertile soil, but rich in building materials. With its proximity to the silk routes, opportunities for trade are abundant. Silk, carpets, oil, salt, saffron, and other riches. This is Shirvan. I want to talk about the Islamic era of this region, particularly of a period in time filled with dynastic tensions, territorial conflicts, and differences in ideologies, but which conversely propelled the region towards a celebration of literature and architecture. Today we'll be exploring the Shirvanshahs between the 12th and 15th centuries and their lasting impact on the landscape and architecture in the area once known as Shirvan, and what is now part of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The Shirvanshahs ruled from 861 to 1538, a span of over 600 years, making it one of the most enduring dynasties of the Islamic world. They were never really independent and had to submit as vassals of different empires throughout the course of their dominion over Shirvan. The dynasty is known for its patronage of culture, such as during the 12th century and on until the 15th century, a time when Shirvan was at the center of Persian literature. Originally an Arab dynasty, the Shirvanshahs, like much of this area of the world during this time, became Persian through the influence of their culture, as well as through marriages with other Persian rulers. One of the first buildings I want to talk about in relation to the Shirvanshah architecture school is the Ramana Tower, which was built around the 12th century. It's around the same time that a lot of other Shirvanshah defensive structures were being constructed, significantly along the northeastern shores, which would indicate that the Shirvanshahs were building strategically to protect themselves from threats coming from that direction. It's clear from the semicircular turrets, the shape of the building, the construction, the thickness of the external walls, as well as the defense courtyard, that this was a building created for defensive purposes and most likely worked in conjunction with other fortresses in the area. Next, I'm going to talk about another pinnacle of Shirvanshah architecture. But first, I need to introduce you to contemporary Baku, which is currently the capital of the Republic of Azerbaijan. It's situated on the shore of the Caspian Sea, the same area I described to you when I described Shirvan. It's a modern city full of gleaming high-rises, highways, cafes, and restaurants. Mixed in with these structures are remnants of Baku's recent past ex-Soviet municipal buildings and backyard oil rigs. Some are still in use, I witnessed when I traveled to Baku. But at the heart of Baku is a city within a city, a Shirvanshah, or inner town. Locals at UNESCO also know it as Old City or the Walled City of Baku. It's a densely packed medieval area built during the Shirvanshah dynasty. I walked through it in cobblestone roads. It feels like stepping into another time period. A spell that's only broken by the odd car here or there and tourists taking pictures of the fascinating architecture. And here is another perspective of the inner city. It's just this compact medieval site that's just absolutely mesmerizing as you walk through it, because it's got buildings and monuments from the 12th century, some from the 18th century. It's just like stepping into another time period, as I said. The walled city of Baku was founded on a site inhabited since the Paleolithic period. And excavations and investigations at the site have demonstrated evidence of Zoroastrian, Sasanian, Arabic, Persian, Shirvani, Ottoman, and Russian influence in the continued construction of this inner city. It's just been building upon itself. Shirvanshahs has preserved much of its 12th century defensive walls, which outline and separate the inner city from the rest of modern Baku, and it's really amazing to see the aerial views, because you just see this surrounded, like encapsulated city within a city, like a medieval city within a modern surrounding. Now we're going to talk about the most iconic monument from the walled city of Baku, and also the oldest, which is the Maiden Tower. It's estimated to have been built around the 6th century, though research shows that it could possibly be even older than that, the base and foundation of the tower. The rest of it is built or a little bit more recent. I say recent, but it's the 12th century is when they estimate it was built. The Maiden Tower was built on solid rock foundation. It's a cylindrical structure of 8 stories, measuring 97 feet high with a diameter of 54 feet. And there's a well on the 2nd floor, which Ronnie Gallagher and Betty Blair postulate in Secrets of the Maiden Tower that what with the tower being so close to the Caspian Sea rainwater collection system is most likely the explanation for this well being present. And you can see in the photos on the slide the difference in the layers. The very bottom of the Maiden Tower, you can see a discontinuity of the stonework, the size of the stones, the quality of the stones, and it's what has been used as evidence to showcase the difference between what they estimate to be 7th century, 6th century construction with 12th century construction. Now, the origin of the tower is the subject of a lot of speculation. Some of the legends suggest that the tower got its name from a legend of a maiden, a young girl that had ordered the construction of the tower, locked herself in, or threw herself off the building into the sea below. In modern day Baku, the tower is not really that close to the sea, but it's possible that at one period in time the Caspian Sea did reach the base of the tower. And there are other theorists that focus on the idea of the tower being constructed for defensive purposes. And there's also some that question that. One amateur historian did the math and calculated the amount of stone and lime used in constructing the Maiden Tower, and realized that that amount of stone could have been used to surround the entire city. So they wondered, why was the tower built this way? Was it really just for defensive purposes, as most investigators believe, or what did this building serve a different purpose, perhaps a ritualistic purpose, or it was a combination of different uses? And where the Maiden Tower was created closer to the beginning of the Shirvanshahs mini Renaissance in the 12th century, the Palace of the Shirvanshahs, which is also located in the walled city of Baku, was created later, more towards the end of the Shirvanshahs, the Shirvanshah dynasty. The Shirvanshah complex is located on a rocky hill in the western part of the walled city of Baku, and the reason for this palace existing there was because a devastating earthquake in the years, I think 1100, 12th century, destroyed much of Shimaki, which was the Shirvanshah's original capital. It obliterated a lot of buildings there. And so they decided to build their capital somewhere else. The seismic activity of their old capital of that area was actually very high, so I think they just decided to pack their bags and go somewhere else with a little bit less seismic activity. Although it was originally built to integrate itself to what is known today as the walled city of Baku, a wall was built around it to kind of demarcate a separation of the palace from the rest of the city. And this is a plan of the Shirvanshah Palace complex. It's comprised of 3 major levels: the upper level, the southern and middle yards, and the western lower yard. And that lower yard includes a bathhouse and an obden, a type of sheltered cistern. And all of these levels are reachable through stairways. They're interconnected. The upper level contains the Divankhana and the main palace, and then the southern and middle yards contain mosques, a mausoleum, and a tomb. Something really interesting that I read when I was researching the Palace of the Shirvanshahs was in a text by L.S. Bradansky, and the article is called "The Shirvanshah Palace in Baku, Azerbaijan," from an archaeology journal, and states that the architects of the Palace of Shirvanshahs were very conscious of the layout of this palace. In one section, the text notes that the finest rooms of the upper floor face south and east, and the architects particularly disrupted the symmetry of the building in order to capitalize on the view and the exposure to the light. So they wanted those specific rooms to face the Gulf, and they didn't care about disrupting the symmetry of the space. They valued the view over the symmetry. And here you have another view of the palace. Because of the differences in elevation that occurred naturally in this terrain, the palace was just this beautiful opportunity to have all these different layers of courtyards. Really gives it a unique look. To me, this shows just so much creativity and working with the natural landscape as they try to figure out solutions, how to make the differences in elevations work in their favor. Now, another important part of the Shirvanshah Palace complex to note is the Divankhana, which is at the northwest section of the palace, and the Divankhana is a tomb. It's what you see here is the entrance, and it's been intricately and elegantly designed, and it's a portal that leads into an entrance hall, and then that connects it to a pavilion, which has 2 utility rooms. And the pavilion was built in the shape of an octagonal dome and supported by a high central stylobate. It was originally thought to have been constructed a little bit later, towards the 16th century, but the stylistic traits signify it was likely built no later than the 15th century, which puts us around just a century before the Safavids captured Baku and the Shirvanshah dynasty ended. And here we get some more images of the Divan-khana, a cross-section, a floor plan, and an entrance view from below, just so that you can see that gorgeous entrance from all angles. There seems to be an emphasis on showcasing the natural beauty of the materials being used, playing with shape, depth, and light to create a variety in pattern and design, in a similar way to which layers of large and small stones were used in the formation of the Maiden Tower to add pattern to the structure. There's not that much color. It's letting the materials showcase the beauty of the architecture. And I mentioned before that Shirvan was in the 12th century a hub of Persian literature. So I thought it would be good to explore some of the poets that made this point in time for Persian literature so prominent and so lasting. The long occupation of Shirvan culminated in a sort of mini renaissance. The spread of Persian literature across today's Azerbaijan and its surrounding neighbors offered a time of relative stability in the 12th century. Was still the Shirvanshah dynasty was a time of a lot of conflict, but in the 12th century they had a little bit of stability, where Shirvan became a prominent center for Persian literature, and this area attracted some of the greatest Persian poets from this era, including but not limited to Khaqani, Nizami Ganjavi, and Falaki Shirvani. And I explored the architecture of the Shirvanshah dynasty. I wondered what connections could be drawn between the historical context of these buildings, which primarily served religious or defensive purposes, and the literary and artistic focus that became popular at this time. And this drew me to start with the poet Nizami Ganjavi. Sarah Manley writes in their analysis of his poetry that he is classified as one of the most eminent poets of the Persianate world, with his poetry serving as a regional heritage alongside the works of Ferdowsi and Rumi. Ganjavi was patronized by several different dynasties, but he was not a court poet, and that's something important to note, especially for the next slide. He is famous for his romance Layli o Majnun, which was commissioned by none other than the Transcaucasian ruler Shirvanshah Aksatan. And this narrative poem was part of a greater work called Khamsa, or Five Treasures. The Shirvanshahs were commissioning works of literature. To me, this demonstrates a desire to have a lasting impact in their community and to gain renown across their territories and beyond. I included this image of Ganjavi's statue in Rome because my first thought when I came across this statue was, what does Ganjavi have to do with Rome? I have no clue. I feel that it sparks an interesting conversation as we progress toward the end of this presentation, because here's the story. The statue was gifted to Rome by the Republic of Azerbaijan's government, and the inscription came under fire as Iran considers Ganjavi to be a Persian poet, given the fact that his masterworks have been written in Persian. So there's this conflict of different communities trying to lay claim to Nizami Ganjavi's identity, and I just thought it was really interesting that there happened to be a statue in Rome, and I did some digging, and this is what came up. Now, in contrast, we have a completely different poet, Haqqani, an equally important poet of the Shirvanshah dynasty. Haqqani had become the eulogist of Manuhir III, the Shirvanshah, the 19th Shirvanshah, at an early age, and he served as an ode writer to them. Haqqani tried to escape to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, but was forbidden by his patron, and he was hence detained by Akhistan I in his attempt to leave Shirvan. And this is the same Shirvanshah Akhsatan that commissioned Ganjavi to write Lailio Majnun. Haqqani's experience of being tied to the Shirvanshah courts allowed him to produce a completely different kind of poetry. Rebecca Gould explores this in Borderland Conflicts, Cosmological Complaints, and analyzes the ways in which poets that had been imprisoned under Shirvanshah rule transformed the genre of prison poetry and made it their own. And Gould writes, although the poets of Shirvan collectively created a local 12th century Renaissance, this literary culture was marked by acrimony and sometimes by outright hostility. Further, she writes, the capricious behavior of fate as construed in Haqqani's poetry mirrors the arbitrary power of Shirvanshah rulers, Seljuk vassals who turned away from Arabic idioms of caliphal sovereignty while transmuting Arabic into Persianate registers. These secular rulers relied on imprisonment as a mode of punishment on a scale never before encountered in Islamic history. Just as sovereignty was reconstituted by rulers' dynastic and imperial lineages across Central Asia and the Caucasus, so did the changing modalities of punishment shape the discursive world of the prison poem. So we have two poets offering two distinct perspectives of what life was like under Shirvanshah rule in the 12th century. And that's the same time period that gave us the expansion of the Maiden Tower, the rebuilding of the Maiden Tower. And here we have an interesting inscription on the tomb located at the Shirvanshah Palace complex. And this is one of the few areas where researchers have been able to obtain the name of the architect. It wasn't really commonly done, leaving your name on a building you created or designed. And the medallion shown above displays in mirrored script, Memar, the word for architect, Ali, and it's carved into the design. And researchers speculate that he carved his name in mirrored script so that the Shirvanshah would not see that he had left a signature on a work ordered by the dynasty. I think it's interesting to note, especially since the Shirvanshah dynasty was originally Arab and through various generations became more and more Persian both in culture and heritage, that the word architect, memar, is a word that originated with the Arabic language. And in Arab countries, architects are called muhandis al-mimari, and those speaking Persian use the word memar. It's very fitting that the etymology of the word for architect reflects the Shirvanshah's Arabic roots as well as their Persian influence. With limited research material on the purpose of the Shirvanshah architectural monuments, there is an opportunity to try to place ourselves in the shoes or imagine what life was like in Shirvan. I was very quickly mesmerized by the beauty of Shirvanshah architecture, but Haqqani shows us that life was not perfect or impeccable under Shirvanshah dynasty. If a poet can be made a prisoner, what different uses have the Shirvanshah buildings served? Can the Maiden Tower have been a prison? The amount of monuments constructed in the 12th century strongly correlate to the prominence of Shirvan as a literary hub, so why wouldn't we apply the same context of conflicts between artist and patron to the topic of architecture in Shirvanshah rule? As we saw with Memar Ali, in his own way, he defied the Shah in order to celebrate his art. Shortly after the construction of the Shirvanshah Palace, which was around the 15th to 16th century, the Shirvanshah Khalilullah I was killed by the forces of Ismail I, the Safavid leader. He kept the Shirvanshahs as vassals, but ended their vassalage due to disloyalty, which led to the end of Shirvanshah rule.